Okay, I'm recording is live, but we can stop talking about ducks. Welcome to this week's Substrate Sync. We have relatively light agenda today, but I'll just kick it off. Right off the bat, I'm looking for. I'm kind of curious to know who's using Substrate Go these days. We're looking to make some potentially deeper changes into the library, and I'm trying to understand who would be impacted by it. And some of these changes, for example, are things like, do the relation structures, should they actually have like private fields in them, or should all their internals be exposed? Like, do we only want to be able to build plans for the builder, or can we build them directly in cases we want to give users more control? We might be looking at how to maybe improve the handling for extensions relations. And it's one of those things like, should we make the rel interface publicly implementable instead of making it internal only, which it is right now. And I'm trying to figure out who might want to know about these changes before we make PRs that do this kind of stuff.
So we are, it's actually funny because you made the other comment of Ocean using cockroach parser to build substrate plans. And I'm like, man, we have a lot of code that does that we're not using anymore. I don't know how far you're along on that, but I'm like, maybe we should try to open source that. I don't know. If you're already like way down the path and whatever, but like we forced.
This is separate from the pre-recording talk of using CockroachDB to parse SQL and turn it into Substrate. It's actually a part of this is we're using Substrate Go to generate the SQL there, or to generate the Substrate there, and we run into limitations periodically where the builder doesn't have the flexibility that we need, and sometimes we want to be able to drop into like, okay, why can't we edit a filter relation directly versus using the builder and things like that?
Yes. Yeah. So. Yeah, so we're not. So those were connected. Those were connected to me, which is that there is a decent chunk of code that maybe I should figure out if Sundeck can open source. That depends on the way that the Go library works right now, and we're probably not going to maintain it going forward. But if it could be valued to the community, that's of note. So that was my. That was how the two are connected. It's just I'm like, well, we've got all this code. If there's like some deep changes, then all of a sudden this code is going to be worth very little, right?
Because it uses the dialect. It uses the way you visit in Substrate Go. It heavily depends on all that stuff.
Yeah. So anyway, so I think it's not a question. Well, I guess there's a question there, which is that like, would people be interested in it? I think it's really hard to answer that question because you're like, well, what the hell would that mean? Because we did a hard fork of Cockroach maybe 2 years ago and completely extracted just the parser and optimizer side of things, and then switched to using Antler as the grammar instead of using what is a fairly difficult to work with. I don't remember what it was, the original grammar was inside of Cockroach. And so, yeah. So anyway, so we have a module, a Go module, which is Cockroach, Planner, Substrate, Conversion, Antler, Grammar. And it might make sense for us to open source that. And that is built heavily, like it's not done. Right, like we stopped doing it before we got all the way to the end. I don't remember what all we got done. David might remember better. So anyway, so I think that the short answer is we're not using it anymore, but there's this chunk of code that does use it that maybe we should open source so that people could be like, oh, should I use this? And then it can have a new life. I think that my main comment in general was because we struggled with the Substrate Go approach, like it was not something we built. It was something that that others built, and then we started using. I would say that my recollection on this is that the original Go approach to protobuf was kind of broken, if I recall correctly. This is kind of like, and so like I think that they implemented a second version of the Go protobuf way that the code is actually generated, if I recall correctly. And so I think that the one question I would have is that if you start really cutting it up, there's a question of, are you starting at a bad place just to get to a slightly better place when there's a much, much better place to start from, right? Because, if you look at the Java library, one of the things that we tried really hard to do was to encapsulate protobuf so that users are interacting with POJOs, and generally speaking, that that the protobuf is not fully exposed. If I recall correctly, we use whatever those bean things are.
We use immutable builders to generate basically one-to-one almost structs that represent the protobuf equivalents. But there's a big push, and there was historically some. Anytime we see protobuf internals in the Substrate POJOs, and for POJO means plain old Java object, so they're basically just like you make a class with some fields and they have a builder associated with it that gets generated. But anytime we see protobuf code in that, we excise it, because the idea is that you should be able to manipulate Substrate plans as Java first-class constructs. And actually, one of the friction points that I have with Substrate Go is that the abstraction is actually a little bit leaky. So in Substrate Java, for example, you can make a scalar function invocation, and it has all of the details inlined in it. It's like, oh, it's this function. In Substrate Go, the scalar function expression struct actually has it actually has an anchor reference to like a collection where I'm like, that in my head, that should be, that is part of the plan serialization. And when I bring it into Go, I should just be inlining. I think that's kind of the change I want to make. Is I want to make the Go stuff more standalone, and then have the conversion to protobuf and back be its own concern to some extent.
Yeah. No, I'm supportive of that. I think the only comment I would make there is that like you might want to spend some time coming from first principles on that as opposed to what the current code is. Like that, and that's why I was bringing up the other protobuf pattern that Go now supports, because I think that there was some conclusion that the existing protobuf pattern that Go, the first version of like ignore Substrate, just Go protobuf compiler, right? I think that there was a conclusion in the community that the current design, or the design that the current Substrate module is using, was bad. And so if I recall correctly,
I'm not sure do you know if you can find out the specifics of what the concern was? I know one thing we did fix already was that we had the protobufs in Substrate Go as well. So we've pulled the generation of protobufs out.
No. So
okay.
what I'm saying is that like if you look at the Substrate, if I recall correctly, this may be backwards. I can't remember, but I believe that in Go, things are basically generated as structs that have exposed fields, whereas in protobuf Java, right, you create builders and everything is immutable, right? When you're doing protobuf object manipulation, and I believe that there's a alternative that the preferred first class protobuf compiler for Go now is a pattern that is much more similar to how Java's protobuf Java compiler works. I'd have to go look it up because it's been 6 months since I've looked at this stuff, but so anyway, so I think that there's an alternative, that the protobuf compiler that you should use today is not the one that the Substrate Go module uses.
I mean, I think the thing I'll highlight as well is actually, I would want to make Substrate Go not care about the protobuf compiler, to be like, hey, here's my Go representation for Substrate plans, and those could both be different targets.
I agree with you, and I'm supportive of that. I was the one that originally drove the separation in Java, right? So like that was I believe heavily in that. It's something we try to do actually in Apache Arrow as well, was to when we're working on the Arrow flight stuff, was the same pattern, which is like let's make sure that gRPC is a example protocol for what Arrow flight can support. So same exact thing. So so anyway, I'm supportive of this. I think that the biggest question is there an interest amongst you folks of us trying to figure out how to open source portions of what was the Sundeck code base that are this stack of Antler parser, Antler parser grammar, Substrate, planner, Substrate, plan, stack.
I'd be curious to look at it. I don't know if it would align with, I don't know, like our company objectives. How much time to spend on that?
Yeah, no, that's fair. Right. Like it's one of those things where like if you're already down a path and you're like, well, this is what we got. Our observation is that like you guys are using the existing cockroach parser.
Yeah, I think we like forked it before while it was still open source, and we're using the cockroach.
Yeah, the Apache version. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you've been using it for years, or right?
Pretty recently, I think probably about 1 or 2 years now.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, I'm gonna look at whether or not we can open source that, so at least you can look at it. But like, yeah, we worked pretty hard to extract the processing part of Cockroach, and then updated the type models, because the newer versions of Cockroach, like the old, I don't know if you've worked with the type system, but like there's some real weaknesses to the way that the Cockroach type system is implemented. So anyway,
yeah, but I'm curious. I'd love to see
it sounds like the Substrate would, or the Sundeck represented as a substrate using Substrate Go would be open to changes, and they would be backwards and compatible, because some of them need to be deeper and more structural probably, but they're not the capabilities would still be there, just be potentially be different and hopefully easy to use. I know that I know Matt Temple and Voltron has made some contributions in the past. I don't know how much they're using it these days or how much impact they would care about, but I can maybe just ping him and ask him about it.
Yeah, I think it'd be good to talk to Matt, because there was a decent amount of friction there when we were trying to adjust things. Like that was his baby, and so when we were trying to like as a concrete example, like if you think about how the Java library serializes to extensions, and how extensions are enumerated as part of the encoding process, right? So you can create a function implementation, or whatever it's called, the function instance, and you don't need a registry at that moment. Yeah, I don't remember exactly how it works, but and you don't need to know the anchor offset stuff, whatever that all is.
That's actually a pain point that Boschen ran into, was that we were trying to deserialize like user-defined types, and so like return value functions, like, oh, the collection's not passed here, so it wasn't missed, so it never gets registered. But it's just like, I don't want to care about that on the Go side. That should be like, I'm converting my fully inline nice Go thing into protobuf, and that's where all that handles. Because right now, the nice thing about the Java library is if I have a project relation, I can look at it and it's fully defined. In Substrate Go, if you have a project rel, it's actually meaningless unless you have access to the collection mapping that maps all the types and functions, right? So it's not a standalone entity. You kind of have to pass around of everything, and I don't know if it's done consistently.
Yeah, no, I would. It sounds like you're hitting all the same things that we were frustrated with. So
that's good. No, it's good to know that.
I think it would be a good net improvements for sure.
The other one is like for extension single rel, where it's just like, oh, we have like a thing that has a protobuf NA detail. It's like, oh, I'd love to just have my custom relation implements the relation interface, and in my two proto, I handle the like convert to serialization. But like I want to be able to have first class custom relations with like proper return type info or proper return schemas, stuff like that. But okay, no, it's good to hear actually, one, that we're not the only people who've been using Cockroach for stuff like this. Two, we're not the only people running into like, this library is a little weird and annoying in certain places. It's like, okay, cool. We're not crazy.
Well, especially if you come from the Java library, because they're very different approaches.
Yeah, and because I've been working on the Java library for like a year and a half and actually hit a lot of it for Reg to make it not suck. I'm like, I sort of know some of the things that work better. The caveat is I need to be careful not to make the Go library too Java.
Yeah, I mean there is some truth to the fact that like Java, like interfaces, encapsulation, like private fields, whereas Go is much more about structs and public fields, right? And the interfaces are kind of second class to me. They're not, but like it's not object oriented, right? Go is not trying to be object oriented. And you have to remember that.
100%. But also, no, I think we've reached the limit of the utility of this conversation, at least for me. I've gotten the things I need to know, which is if you're going to propose changes and reach out to people, they'll be open to it. If the Sundeck code was open sourced, I think I'd be interested in trying to update it as part of a target of like, hey, here's some changes you want to make. What do the impacts look like in actual code beyond just like our internal stuff? That would also be useful. But yeah.
So with the Go library going forward, like, should we try to, or like you said, like build it from the ground up to have all these like separations concerns, like encapsulations, or is it worth, I don't know, trying to work off of V4, V5 and refactor it into that kind of pattern?
I would suggest, I mean, you guys have to decide what your time and availability and desire to do things are, right? But I can't make any suggestions there. But I would, if I were working on this, I would spend a little time being like, how do I think it should work given current state of the art and current knowledge? Mm-hmm. Because I do wonder whether or not it actually reminds me a little bit of the Rust Arrow library, where there was the initial Rust library that was written, I think by, I don't remember if Wes wrote it or someone else, but it was originally written, and I think the Rust Parquet stuff maybe was that way too. It was written by a certain group of people, and was, decent first draft. And then someone who was, I can't remember the best name, but a super experienced Rust developer was like, oh, there's much better ways to do a bunch of these things, and basically built a new library. And I think that turned out much better, and that ultimately became the Arrow Rust library. Like, I don't remember what the name of it was. Like Arrow Rust, it was like Arrow Rust 2 or something like that. And then like at some point we just said, fuck that. Like this is the library everybody wants to use because it's just better. And so I do wonder whether or not that is the case for the Go library. It's painful because there's a decent amount of scaffolding you have to do just because there's all these objects. But I think I would spend the time to think about it a little bit and be like, okay, well, what what's the right protobuf compiler? Like, how would the actual interfaces work? I do think, as Victor said, be careful not to just have people who are, I don't know how much pushing you've done Go, but make sure it's people who've done a lot of Go for the last few years to do it. But I think that I'd at least do the exercise to figure out what that looks like, and then compare it to what we have, and be like, okay, should we try to go from where we are to there, or are we going to go a completely different place because of where we're starting?
Right. Makes
And
sense.
you have generics now, so there's more Go features that you've got to play with.
In some
look
ways,
at
I
these
actually feel like the current library tries to be too tricky with Go features.
Yeah,
I
there
saw
were
the
some cases.
generics, which I
There's
barely
one
understand.
case I absolutely couldn't figure out how it was doing something, because it was being incredibly tricky. It's like, oh, if you pass in a different pipe, it does something completely different, and the behavior completely changed. It's like, okay, this needs to at least be documented.
Yeah, exactly. No, there are times where I'm like, this is kind of like those early Perl scripts. It's like, oh, that's fancy.
Okay, so you both of the generics
Once you figure it out.
Go. That's really understandable. The thing I'll add to it actually is I think that we're in a better position now as well to do something like that potion, just in the sense that the reason Substrate Java is the way it is that we used it heavily in our integrating it for Planner, and as a user we figured out here are all the things that kind of don't work. And Substrate Java, the way it was like 2 years ago, is effectively an entirely different library than it is today, to the point where we've made 40 breaking release changes probably since then. I imagine we'll need something similar for Substrate Go, whether we do from scratch or from zero. Something I have been thinking about is that when eventually we do go to 1.0, I might suggest that we deprecate Substrate Go and introduce Substrate Goland or Substrate Golang. And it's like, yeah, here's the nice 1.0 library that's not at version 45.
Right.
But I think I either doing something from scratch or iterating on an existing library. I think it's good to experiment in the space. And once we actually, I forgot this as well, Substrate Go is only post 1.0 by accidental happenstance. If we release 2.0 by accident, because pre-commit is weird, semantic release is weird, and we didn't revert it or didn't know how to like excise.
We
all
did,
the
yeah,
time.
we did. I fucked up in thinking that it was not as big of a problem. I didn't realize the forcefulness of the versioning on the Go dependency side.
Right.
That's fucking brutal.
Yeah, so like V4 is really like V0.4 or something.
Yeah, exactly. No. So what happened was is that like in the Substrate, like we actively set Substrate, whatever the thing is, the pre-commit, release, auto-commit thing, so that it goes from point 0.9 to 0.10 in Substrate core, and nobody did that in Substrate Go. So when it went from 0.9, it went to 1.0.
Oh no.
And then we didn't really realize the problem until whatever, a little bit later.
I mean, there's a world also where we could do something like Substrate Go pre or Substrate Go beta, which is where we take Substrate Go now, 1.0 it being like, hey, we're iterating on a whole new design for this, do that. And once that stabilizes, really Substrate Go land. Maybe I'll write something about this because it is annoying to have to update all of the import paths.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's saying creating a new coordinate that's at one dot that has the right settings for the, because otherwise we're gonna have the same problem once we get to the 10th change. But yeah, I support coming up with a new coordinates. If you ever try to experiment with Google's Gen AI Go libraries, you want to kill yourself because there are like 6 different names and libraries because they've done one version and they're like, oh, let me do a different kind of thing, and then like it's anyway. So, but I think having a new coordinate and getting back to a point X and just marking the old one as deprecated, I think even if we're not forking it, we're just literally like switching things over.
And also, I can write something about what our plan for 1.0 is and make it like for 1.0 we will have Substrate Golang as in like here's the nice library that you can use. In the interim, here's the experimental, not so much beta, it's actively in use, but like actively being iterated to like correct design, and we'll promote that to Substrate Golang when it's done. And then Substrate Go is an exit. It's the same as last week, potentially. What was last week? Oh, Golang, cool. Also, hi YouTube, we've been demonetized. Thanks, Docs. You have to use unalive. Okay. Canonical URIs or URNs? I think I put the end down, but Ben, do you want to talk about it? I think you've been the one driving the work, so you can talk about it.
I mean, I think that everyone has context here, but basically we were just dealing with some issues where multiple libraries were implementing their own interpretation of what the URI should be for the kind of default extensions. And especially for the default extensions, it of course makes sense to standardize into one common name because different implementers should be talking with the same impression of what Substrate entails. So the issue kind of started as trying to consolidate to a common thing, which I think we sort of settled on using URNs. But now it's kind of turned a little bit into a bit of a broader discussion about using URNs in general, not just using URIs to identify any sort of extensions, but always enforcing URNs, which seems like a pretty reasonable change to me as far as I can tell. Like I have no issue with taking that approach other than the fact that taking that approach will lead to a pretty big diff in the Substrate repository and will have a lot of changes to the actual protobufs. I don't think that it will make a difference to any of the serialization or deserialization because it's just changing the message names and the field names. And so I don't think it would have an impact in that sense, but it would just mean, a big grep and replace of URI for URN, plus a couple places where it's not quite that simple. But
it's also it's also extra crisp because if we change the names and the protobufs, it's not breaking at the protocol level, but it's breaking at the JSON level, which we actually do care about as part of a compatibility promise.
Okay, so
this actually might be a case for pre 1.0. These are URIs, and then put a note being like make an issue for 1.0 being like 1.0 release, all URIs are now URNs. Congratulations.
Okay.
I don't remember the shape exactly, but I'd be inclined to just add a second field that's URN and deprecate the URI one now. That solves the JSON dynamic.
That would also make the migration easier. And I think some things, not everything that is a URI should become a URN. I think there's like things in like the file reader where it's like, oh, this is a URI to a file. I'm like, cool, that makes sense. It's just like all the namespace and stuff.
Yeah.
But I think the second
namespace,
skill actually
yeah.
would be the worst because we can also do like a deprecate the old one, say, hey, here's the new one. Most systems can do both simultaneously, which makes the migration a bit easier as well.
I was going to ask, when you say it's a large diff, do you mean that like it's a lot of files where like, you know, one character is changed? Because it doesn't
Probably.
seem like it's a large diff. I mean, like I know that like, yeah, sure, the top of all of the YAMLs is going to have to change. That's one line per file. I know that there's probably some places where it's like, oh, I'm going to write this text differently, or like there's a comment here. But like when you say large diff, it doesn't seem like a lot of code is going to change.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, large but simple. Large in the quantity of files it will touch, but not large in the that it would be hard to look at and understand what's going on.
And like, if you
It's
isolate,
going to give you a lot of credit for like lines changed inside of Substrate. It's good for you.
Yeah.
You can
if
go to your
you
boss
isolate
and say,
it to
look at how
like
much
here are
work
the
I've done
code
in
changes in
Substrate.
one commit, and here's a commit with all the generated changes, that also makes review easy. And if it's like, oh, you've touched 400 YAML files and added a URN field with this new name, I'm like, cool, that's probably fine. I can just skim that.
Yeah, so I blame Weston for snowballing your ticket into a broader issue. I'm not sure that was his intention. That was what I read as his intention, which is where I got confused. I feel like Weston's comment is right on, which is like, well, we don't normally try to do this stuff. At the same time, I'm kind of like, this has been, to me, this has been a 1.0 issue that's been hanging out there, and we've just kind of ignored it for a really long time. And it kind of does need to be formalized somehow. Like,
I mean, it's also a sign of the success of the ecosystem where it's like, oh, now we're trying to get the libraries to talk to each other and they don't agree on the URL. It's like, well, okay, that's obviously not good. But now everything's talking
yeah,
to each other.
pretty basic problem. Yeah.
Oh, it's not even behavior. It's like if you have plans with URI and you add URN to them, and you replace URI with URN fully, then you can't read them in. Like you'll have no URI basically, right? Like you won't even be able to read the plans because they're from like inconsistent behavior. And yeah, actually, all the systems don't even look at the URI/URN anyways, which is another thing to fix. But I think we want to maybe address that in data fusion and other places where it's just like, okay, before we go change their code, we should probably agree with our code.
There was one more outstanding question, which was, do we want to put URN colon at the front?
I saw that.
In at least pre 1.0, we have to.
Why do we have to?
1.0, well, I mean, you want to distinguish your URNs from HTTPS pre 1.0.
Oh, but if we have
So I think we're talking about
field.
adding a URN field next to the URI field, deprecating the URI field.
Okay, well, if you're adding a separate one, then yeah, it doesn't matter.
And that's also nice because then we have a thing called URN that contains a URN, and another thing called URI that contains a URN.
Yeah.
I mean, a URI is a URI, so, but yes,
Yeah, no, just, sorry. I don't think that was the same question.
I mean, the question that I think I saw that was the big one is that we want to force everyone to use URNs for outside of Substrate. Like, oh, I'm at Datadog and we have our Datadog URNs, and you're at Acera and you have your Acera URN, so you're at Sundeck and you have your Sundeck URN.
Outside and inside.
So put an example in chat.
it's everywhere.
That was the question I saw. Do we want URN colon or just
To me, that
subject
seems
colon?
redundant to have URN colon at the beginning. If every single one has to be a URN and the field is a URN, that's my view.
It is redundant, but also I think
Weston likes to put T underscore name a variable to declare it.
Let's just not, I mean, this is like being pedantic. It's part of the URN spec. So if you don't have URN colon in the front, you can't actually call it a URN. Now we could say it's just a unique identifier following a URN like syntax. I'm fine with that.
I'd follow.
Or
the
or
spec.
we can
I
call
love
URN and
Weston.
just
I
I would
I
follow
do
the
love
specs
Weston.
because if somebody's got a parser that
Yeah.
that wants to read in the URN and do URN things on it, it's better if it conforms so they don't have to go and prepend
I-
URN
I
just to
think the
throw it into the
opposite.
library.
I think the opposite, which is that like it's just a substrate like identifier.
Yeah.
Like, and this is what a substrate identifier is. Just like, like whatever you use these other package names, like, like Maven identifier. Like,
Yeah.
is a Maven coordinate a URN? No, it's just a Maven coordinate. So this is a substrate coordinate. I don't know, like.
So should we
Like,
not use the phrase URN then?
I
think we
you
should
can also
not
take a
use the
step back
phrase
and say
URN.
in the encoding it's URN : the thing, and then if you want to add as part of the spec to turn this into our URN, concatenate the two, and you're done. No,
If we're going to make an incompatible change anyway, I think we should just not use the word URN. I like substrate coordinate and just go there.
It's fine with me. I'm in no way married to URN, so
I do like the idea of coordinate, and then also it's still very boring to parse. You just do colon.
Yeah, it's
So
just
don't use
split on
colons
colon.
as part of your name, and you're good otherwise.
Yeah.
Then we can add versioning. To the end of it.
David looks very unhappy, but maybe I'm just reading his face wrong.
It's like everybody's got to write their own parser for parsing substrate coordinates instead
Well,
of
maybe-
using whatever.
Well, so let me ask a dumb question. Who needs to parse substrate coordinates?
Don't you need to parse it in order to get in order to
Hmm.
know that it's functions versus not functions? And
You're saying it's just a string?
It's just a string. Like I
but
mean
it's not black box, is it?
yeah,
Well,
I think
okay,
so. I
actually-
mean, I don't think there's any reason.
To get to David's point, it's just a string until we go functions arithmetic : version, which is another ticket that's a follow up to this, which is like how do we do versioning? At which point you do have to parse them. The caveat being that technically, if you have
No,
URN
hold a sec,
substrate
hold a sec,
functions
hold a sec,
arithmetic
hold a sec.
version, that's not URN anymore. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's we said this is not a locator, right?
No, but the
Like, it's-
versioning
yeah.
stuff is like if you want to. This plan is this system supports version X of these functions, and you're sending it to a thing Y. The reason this original discussion was like, oh, should we add a URI that also has a version baked in? I was like, hey, we should split that because what do versions even mean? And interact between versions of substrate things is like a whole other discussion that we maybe want to have.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that
versions,
if we
you need to
if
answer
we
the question
specifically-
greater than or equal.
yeah, no, it's this question of like if they're not locators, like that to me is the real question, which is that like are these addresses or like pointers?
They're namespaces, I think,
Maybe.
is effectively what they are.
Yeah, I don't know what the name. Yeah, so anyway, so it's like there's another world where we define how the one goes to the other, right? Like I actually think that there's an argument to. I think there's an argument to be made if we haven't made it, which is, and maybe this is true, but that the string should be at the top of the YAML. Did we say that?
What do you mean the string should be at the top of the YAML?
Like, let's
The
say that it's like
identifier.
substrate dot colon math colon v1, right? Like whatever that string is, right? Like that's the string we use in the plan. That should probably be the string that's in the top of the YAML.
well,
Like we
I
shouldn't do
think I see the
magic
point
like
you're
file
making.
name binding. What's that?
I think I mentioned that earlier in the ticket, like the idea basically of having the extension declare what its name is inside of the file. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Someone raised a point though when I mentioned that about a reason for why that wouldn't be a great solution, but I can't remember what they said. It might have been you, Victor, I thought, and maybe we just talked about that in person, but it was something about clashing. I can't remember it right now.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly enough, yeah, it means that you could put the same name in two files. Then what the fuck does that mean?
Well, then what does the file name mean? Or is the file name just not relevant anymore? You just have like one
I'm saying that in this world, that the file name doesn't mean anything. I'm trying to make it clear that it's not a locator. Like this is a weird case where like if it's URI, it's a locator, right?
Yeah.
if it's an ID, like, then it's not really a locator. And so like having like these weird patterns where it's a semi-locator, where substrate is like, oh, it means it's in this repo, but it's not like substrate IO, it's just substrate or whatever. And then this means it's in the subdirectory extensions with the YAML file that has a standard extension. Like it's kind of like a pseudo locator. I'm kind of wondering whether or not if we're saying that these are just yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess if you look at like Maven coordinates, those are locators.
I'm trying to agree with David, and we should just use URNs, which have a meaning and are basically namespaces, and then it's like we're using an open source thing that has a meaning that works for our issue, and then we can build anything we need on top of that.
But that doesn't answer this question, which is that like where is the formality of the rules that say that this locator means this file?
Yeah, and I think at that point it makes sense to actually say like, oh, we tag the files with them, and then there's still a separate question of like, how do you go automatically being like, hey, I have a URN for this thing, and there's a file on the internet that has this URN name in it. I'm like, okay, those things are the same. How do I go between the two right now? I'd be like, well, okay, go look it up on GitHub or sub-modulate into your project like most things do. But I think part of the reason
I think those are two disjunct things. I was going to say like, hey, like one decision point is it URNs or subject coordinates or something? Then the separate one is there a mapping, like a way that you can parse the string to figure out where it is? Or is it that the things that declare their identity and you match them up and then you're not parsing them, right? Because then theoretically we could create a V6 of the mathematic extensions as another file and have it sitting right next to the V5 version of that file.
It's part of the version is part of the name.
It's declared at the top of the file, right? It's just like, this is the namespace. The namespace of this YAML file is this. You know, just like you declare the package at the top of a Java file.
Another just small alternative is if there's a concern about kind of making it clear how these things are meant to be parsed, especially if we don't append URN at the beginning. There's also, I think, no reason that it has to be one single field. You could also imagine it being like organization string and then name string, and then we could later have a separate version string, and then just specify in the documentation that the naming convention is based off of the combination of those three fields. I don't know if that's a better solution or not, but at least then it's sort of pre-parsed. You know, the separation is clear.
Who's passionate about this?
I think the problem for this point is, can I have a name that I can put in a plan and I can include that in Substrate Java and Substrate Go? When I generate a function, it's in this namespace. And when I generate in Java, it's in this namespace. And when I read it in Rust, it's in this namespace. And those all agree. And right now, I don't want to use the GitHub URI because that's tied to GitHub. No, it's people were talking like, oh, we should use the GitHub version.
Victor, you know how the gluten people work, right? They're like, I need a field here. I'm going to add a field here, like without spending a lot of time thinking about like, well, how do different systems do this, and like, how do we make it something that's standardized? I feel like you're in that situation right now. You're like, I just want a fucking thing that's consistent across the three things. Like, let's like, and I get that. But at the same time, it's like, hey, if we're gonna rework this a little bit, like, I think we need to spend. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. I think that part of the problem is that nobody here is actually passionate about this. Like, nobody cares that much. That's what I read in the room is that everybody's like.
The remaining question, it sounds like, is like, I think we agree we need some common namespace concept. We still need some way to look up or be like, okay, this namespace. Substrate functions arithmetic. That's the namespace. That's the URN for it. That still needs to be associated with a file at the end of the day, and that's kind of what we're missing.
I'm not sure that that's true. I'm gonna go out there and say that, which is like it could be associated with a number of files, right? Like there's an interesting thought there, which is like like if we have a standard set, like we said, like, oh, this is the mathematics standard set, and it's like 8 files, right? Like that could be the way it works, right? If the files themselves declare what package they're in, right? If you think about like Java, right? Like you can have multiple files in a directory that all declare the same package, right? I mean, in Java, the directories are based do the package names, and different systems don't actually use the directory names to mean package name, right? And so the files can declare package names, and you can have multiple files in a package. So it's interesting because it interacts a little bit with the whole idea of like collections of functions, right? Like, oh, this is the standard library of functions, and it's these, and so this is the name of the standard library, and it happens to include these 7 files or whatever. Like if you use the same package for multiple files, you'd obviously have to apply the same rules, the same package rules, which is you can't have 2 function implementations in that package that have conflicting parameter names and names and parameters, right? Anyway, I think it's important we do this. I think that it'd be great if someone, Ben, he's like, I didn't sign up for this. I signed up for like this little thing, and it got this fucking big fucking. This is the problem with Substrate sometimes, is we're trying to be like, okay, well, we got to solve the problem. We should solve the problem so we don't have to worry about it again. That's kind of my feeling. Is that like, yes, we could just check the box and be like, okay, well, for Substrate core, this is what it is. The problem sometimes is that then we realize when we're solving the real problem, we're like, oh shit, we did it wrong for Substrate core, and we've got to go and change it again. So I kind of feel like there are 2 or 3 different things that we've talked about. Like there's the actual structure of the thing. There's the question of whether we should be parsing it or not. And then there's like, what is the rules around mapping? Maybe, I don't know. Maybe that's 2 or 3 things. I don't know. But I kind of feel like
I'm
it's
trying
like,
to figure out why we actually parse it.
The only reason I could imagine to parse it would be if we ever add like a versioning concept, and that could be that could be part of the URN.
But if you're just looking for, you need to know about the versioning concept because you just look at the different tag. I think putting the identifier at the top solves most of the problems, because that was one of the problem points, was figuring out which one you were in. Because you were trying
which one of what you are in.
Which package basically you were in, right? You
What's
didn't know
the package?
you had to figure out
package?
the path, and then you had to convert the path into a URI, and that was the problem we were having. But if you just have it in there, your external tool just has to list the files, load them in, and read the package identifiers at the top, and everything should go. And if it says underscore v3, then you're using underscore v3 because that's the thing that you referred to. You don't care that it was you don't even know that it's version 3. It just happens to have an underscore v3 at the end, and everything just sort of works. I think that actually solves most of the things that I'm concerned about. I don't remember any other particular use cases where people suddenly had to dive into looking at the structure.
Victor, did you follow that part where it's like if there's a header that says, foo bar v?
A header in what? There's too many
in the YAML.
In the YAML extension, in symbol extension. Okay.
So functions.yaml at the top says on functions.
That's the identifier.
Functions arithmetic has I am URN this. And then if you have a plan with URN this, like, okay, these 2, this is where this name is bound. We don't necessarily define how to look it up, but cool. If I have load up all the extensions, I have the namespaces for them. That makes sense to put in the extensions as well. Like, hey, I should self-identify as like, here's my namespace. That seems entirely reasonable to me.
And so the comment David was making was, if that's the case, then is there any reason to ever parse these things? Other than if humans looking at them and like, oh, this is a substrate one versus something else.
The
but
thing
like
that's
The
come
only
up, I
reason
think.
I could,
Go ahead.
the only reason I can think of is if a consumer wants to say, I implement substrate functions arithmetic for all versions less than or equal to 1.3.
Yeah, that's kind of, I think, the use case that I'm thinking about, where at some point we added a function to functions arithmetic and I have to do a rolling upgrade across, or I have to go upgrade stuff. And it's like, okay, my consumer, you could say that you need versioning for this, you don't necessarily, but it's like, my consumer, okay, if I want to use this new function, before I can put it into my producer, I have to make sure my consumer has a greater version. So it's like, hey, my consumer has to have a greater version than the producer. Now I can bump the producer and it's like, okay, those versions are now matched. And like go forward that way. Like that's the one case where I think versions matter. And this the whole question about versioning as well is like, do we actually ever want to allow making breaking changes to function files? So like removing functions from files is technically very bad.
Yeah,
And-
no, it is. I think, I mean, my inclination would be is to name it so that if in the future we want to define a parser, we can, but we're probably not parsing right now. Like, I'm not scared about like, okay, we have to define a parser for : semantic number version. Right? Like that doesn't, like, I mean, like, that doesn't seem like a big deal if we need to do it. Because URN's not even going to solve that, right? Because I don't think that URNs define the semantic numeric versioning.
No, in the places where I've seen it used, if you have like functions arithmetic : version, the actual schema is URN is the format, substrate is the namespace, and then functions arithmetic : version is like the last string fully, and then you'd have to do additional processing on that technically.
Yeah. So I think, yeah. So my thinking is really what we're saying is that we're going to have a version string. It's going to have three components, and the third component is a semantic version, numbering version, or whatever, right? And we don't need to parse it today. If we get to the place that you guys are talking about, where it's like, I want to support A is less than 5 but greater than 6 or whatever, that doesn't work. But you know what I mean. Then we can. I think we should define what the parsing rules are, and then note that you don't need to parse it right now. Right? I don't think anybody's gonna. I mean, it's actually funny because we have the same problem with what's it called? The function identifiers. Right? Like, I specifically built them so that you should never parse them. Like, that was how I was driving, or I was involved in the driving of the creation of those. Is you should never parse them. You should always just have a list of the functions you support, and then the functions come in and you compare the strings, right? But then people start parsing them.
I mean, you can also make the case that the URN stays a namespace forever, and there's an optional version field where if you don't set it, it's like, cool, I don't need to look at it. And if you set it, you have to do some math. But that could be separate and not need to be parsed.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the return value derivation language, like if we require users to parse that, then it's kind of like, this is like telling someone that you have to fight a bear and then worrying about whether or not we should make them wear a hat while they fight the bear. It's like, I don't think they're going to care.
It's like, okay, we added a : version field that you now need to handle versus, hey, so here's an antler grammar for this dynamic function, a little mini language.
And if we go down this, like if we're talking about parsing and needing it for versions anyway, then URI isn't solving the problem anyway.
No.
URN, because it is not going to give you semantic version parser.
I guess the reason I was thinking about it or using URNs and not super concerned about it, where in my head it was like, we definitely need a URN or some kind of namespace concept. URN solve it. If we want to ever add versioning to it, which is kind of the only thing I could ever imagine adding to it, adding it to the URN is relatively trivial to be like, hey, here's some additional stuff you could do, or adding it as a sidecar in a version field is straightforward. David's point about adding the namespace to the function, the extensions themselves, I think solves the like, this thing in this plan maps to this function. Like, these are associated. Whether we want to do something like substrate math, which is like a multiple list of other extensions to pull in, I think is a separate question / feature that I think we can also add on top of it if we wanted to. But like, nothing that we're doing here feels like it's backwards compatible, like or would cause future implementation problems in a way that's hard to deal with. To Weston's point, if we add a version either inline or as a separate thing. That's not the bear.
Yeah, I think that the thing I would say about I'm fine with saying like let's set strict constraints and in the future make them consider potentially reducing them, right? And so the example of like, you know, if we say it today, because you're gonna have to deal with this problem, right? You read the 10 files that you have, and 2 of them have the same name. Because someone's gonna have copied and pasted a file, right? Like people make mistakes, right? If we say, hey, the rule is that, you know, that's an error state, right? I think what you're saying, Victor, is that if 2 YAML files had the same identifier and you tried to load them both into the same context, that should be an error state for now.
And I would argue that if your system is loading the Substrate URNs and you've also pulled in the Substrate URNs and added your own stuff to them, I'm like, that's actually a failure mode. It's like, use your own namespace. We gave you namespaces.
Yeah, but I'm saying, but like, you know, like whatever. Like I'm working on Datadog stuff, and I create 2 files that have the same Datadog URN, right? Like it could happen at any level. So I'm basically saying like I'm fine with saying that is an error state today, and we should enforce that in the because it's kind of more of an implementation detail to me. I'm not even sure it's a spec thing, because you know if people can declare their URNs, they can declare them as whatever they want.
To David's point, we could say that for now it's 1 file per URN, and in the future we provide logic for like, okay, here's how you can merge them if you want to split it apart and have it different. And to David's point, it's like the uniqueness constraint now is that within a single file, no function can have the same signature. And that naturally extends to, okay, it's the same URN across multiple files, so functions arithmetic is now functions plus, functions minus, or whatever. And they get merged into the same namespace. That's not unreasonable. It doesn't
Also,
feel
if
like
you're
if you
gonna-
say, go ahead.
If you're going to split across 2 different YAML files, then either you made the split kind of arbitrarily just because it got kind of long, or you made the split because there was some sensible way to group the 2 files into 2 sub areas. And if there's some sensible way to group it, then it probably just makes sense for them to have their own names anyways. But if it's the case where it's just like an arbitrary split, I don't see the reason not to just have a really long file in that case.
Arithmetic is big and hard to work with.
And actually, the thing that I'll say as well is if we decide that we want to allow split, if we start with 1 file per namespace, we can always soften that constraint. It's not backwards. That's not breaking.
You might actually want to go 1 function per file for some reason, in just because your automation or something.
I have a suggestion here, and I don't remember. I just don't recall offhand what was the proposal. My recollection of the proposal was it was a 3-part name where the 3rd part was a version. I that may be wrong. That was my recollection of the ticket. Given this conversation right now, my suggestion is it's a 3-part name plus the version. Maybe that was the recommendation. I don't know. The reason I'm saying that though is that we already see, right? Like it would be nice to have an arithmetic package. Like this is for humans, not because computers are dealing with it, but like for humans, like I want to have a Substrate arithmetic package, and then maybe I want to have groupings, right? Like the decimal functions versus the the date math functions or whatever. I don't know, but like it seems like it would be useful to have 3 levels of name, or allow 3 levels of name, and then the version, just because like we're already in this situation where I'm going to want to break things up, but it would be useful for when I'm talking to you to be able to say like I'm talking about Substrate : math, right? Like if you think about them like packages, it's nice to be able to say like, oh yeah, I'm talking about Substrate : math. I'm talking about that collection of things.
Could we also allow for the possibility where we have like a separate notion of name and then a separate notion of version later? And those can be different fields in the actual encoding. But the name, we don't have to enforce that it's just organization file. It could be as many collonated items as you want. And then you can, create sub notions of things. And then when you say Substrate : math, you're referring to Substrate : math : asterisk, where, that's everything
I think that because humans are interacting with the files, I think it's so. I think I'm supportive of an arbitrary number and just saying that that the version number can be at the end or something like that. I don't know. Like I kind of feel like then maybe it should be a different separator for the version number, but maybe just say it's the last, like, just because otherwise, or I could argue that in that case you just have a default. You require the version number always, because otherwise you got to figure out whether the last thing is a version number or not, which I don't. Right? If you know that the position for version number is always the same and sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not, that's fine. But that implies my other comment, which is that having worked on this for a while, like I would like to have one string for the identifier in the YAML file, for example, as opposed and sure, it may be a structured string, but as opposed to say multiple fields, which I kind of think what you're talking about is multiple fields.
One thing I would be worried about is if we had like substrate math and then substrate like arithmetic and such, I'd be like, oh, so substrate math encapsulates multiple files, so I encode my function as substrate math plus. But then my writer's actually, no, I'm using substrate arithmetic plus, but math isn't plus, or arithmetic isn't math, so it's the same identifier. But now you have to do like the resolution logic is more complicated versus if we have just like arithmetic. And
I don't think anybody was suggesting that we do that.
Then what is substrate math?
I'm saying that like
all these files.
I'm saying like if I have 5 files and I have substrate math, dates, substrate math, floats, substrate math, decimals, and each of those is colon, like it's 3 parts, right? Substrate colon maths colon dates, substrate colon math colon decimals, substrate colon math colon foo, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I'm talking to you, I can say like, yeah, let's like we support all of the substrate math stuff, right? Which means I support all of the things that are qualified in substrate math.
I think
like it's a human thing. It's not a
put this into like a weird place of like. To your point about the human readability, I'm on board for like substrate arithmetic is, oh, here's the functions arithmetic directory with like all the individual files for functions that then get merged into a single collection with all the same namespace. Like having the same namespace across multiple files, I'm worried about.
No, I'm not. Hold on a sec.
Okay.
I'm saying that we have. Let's just work with 2 files. We have 2 files, right? We have 2. We actually have this today, right? We have multiple files that have math stuff in them, right? We have a file that has the decimal stuff, which has a bunch of decimal stuff in it, right? And then we have a bunch of file that has a bunch of the integer math.
Yeah,
right?
We also have like log stuff, log functions, aggregate, decimal.
Yeah, exactly. Stuff. And so I'm saying that as humans, we decide to put. We say that there's a 3-part identifier, the 3-part URN, whatever you want to call it, 3-part coordinate, right, for the name. And we just decide to name them. The first part substrate because it's in the substrate project.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second part, we just name them all math. And then the third part, we name them something that's more specific to their particular nature. Okay. There's still separate
Just put a
identifiers.
message that's like just basically what you just said, in case it's helpful to see it.
Oh, you put it in the doc? No, where'd you put it?
In the call messages. So whatever the chat is for
I
Google
see
Meets.
just writing it down to be clear, but then I don't see a message afterwards. Oh, above. There it is.
Before, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Got it. Yeah. I'm just saying that, like, yes, that's what I'm saying, Ben. Is just like, yeah, like this. So that's the names, and they're unique, right? Those are 2 unique names. They're 2 different files. We're not introducing anything new. I'm like, but like, this is just helpful. I'm like, oh, these are both math files. Okay.
And also in the case where you want to spread something out over multiple files, but you don't have a good semantic separation between the content of the 2 files other than just basically wanting to paginate it, I don't see any reason why someone couldn't just choose to do substrate math 1, you know?
Yeah.
Like if that's what you choose to do,
totally.
that's what you choose to do. But it's a unique name. It's it's clear.
In
So-
my head, though, I just feel like the script of subtraction from the end. It's now substrate math. Functions arithmetic is now namespace substrate math. Functions logs is now same namespace functions math, and we just merge them together into one big thing. And structurally,
Wait. I don't know what you're talking about. Like I feel like you're like I'm like
I don't know what you're talking about.
top of our
No, we're
existing
gonna-
files.
Huh?
No, I'm saying like just put these to the top of the existing files.
but that functions arithmetic right now has subtraction and addition in it, basically.
That's fine. Well, so we put substrate math general. And top of
I
the
just mean, why
existing
don't we just make the namespace like this is we're getting a bit bike but the substrate math can just be the namespace, and then we have functions arithmetic is now namespace substrate math, and we split functions arithmetic into functions.
No, I don't
plus-
want to. Do you want to go modify a bunch of YAML files, like edit them and separate them out into different ways?
No, but then
I
how do the
don't want to.
namespaces work, dude? Like I don't. If you're not, if you,
But,
not
they're
files only have one namespace.
identifiers. They're identifiers. They're not named like they are identifiers. Each file has an
Identifiers to-
identifier.
Yes, but okay, you're
Each
saying that
file
we
is
can introduce
identifier.
like a substrate math addition identifier.
No.
I'm
You're
confused.
way overthinking this.
Yes.
So at file 1, we're going to put foo1 at the top of it. File
Mhm.
2, we're going to put foo2 at the top of it.
Mhm.
Okay. And then when we have the plans, we're going to look for the file that has foo. The plan's going to say foo1, and we're going to do that. And then when we say foo2, we're going to use the foo2 file. They're just IDs. Okay. We're just trying to give the identifiers something that people can understand. So I'm saying that the current files, let's say that we have like substrate, like when it rewrites substrate for me. I just shouldn't have picked so substrate math general is maybe the current file. And then we have substrate math. Stop rewriting that. Math decimal for the decimal file. We have those two files. We put those as the names at the top of them.
Mhm.
There's no fanciness. There's nothing that's happening. I'm just saying 3 parts seems better than 2. That was all I was saying. I feel like I'm boiling Victor's brain on what seems to be the simplest possible thing.
I mean, you
Like,
told
he's
me
like,
I
"Oh,
was
I'm
thinking enough about it. Now I'm overthinking it. What do you want me to do? No, we're good.
Yeah, I mean, you say 3 is better, but just being clear, where we would be not taking a position at all about how many colons are in the thing. It's just
Well,
organization and then whatever you want after.
Well,
Substrate
I think
identifier,
that,
technically.
I think that we have to choose one of 2 things. I think we either have to choose the number of identifiers, or we have to require version. Because like if version is optional, right? If you think about like variadic functions, right? You can't have an optional argument and a variadic function. Because it's like,
Yes.
how do you distinguish whether this last thing is the version, is the optional argument, or part of the variadic signature?
That's
Right?
come up for a separate thing, so should we even have optional? It's a whole other conversation.
So all I'm saying is that we need to choose either having variadic, which is what you're describing, Ben, which is like, hey, I can have as many names as I possible, but then we need to not have any optional parameters. And version right now we've been talking about as optional. So I think that either version is not optional and we support multiple, like an arbitrary number of strings, or we have a fixed number of strings and version is optional. Does that make sense? And I don't know that I have a strong opinion one way or the other. In some ways I like having version be optional because then we can kind of punt on really dealing with versions right now.
Yeah.
But I think it forces
Hello?
us. Go ahead.
Could we also just do, again, this kind of thing where we like separate what we call a name, which functionally is just any string in the world you want, and then a version, which is whatever we later decide is a version thing. And then at least it's clear if the version is actually present or not. And internally to the actual implementation, you can just take name, version or something. But this way we actually know if it's present at all times. Right? Like it's part of the YAML file and it's separate too.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of it, but I mean we could do that.
Okay.
Like,
The
it's
more
why
I think
not?
about this, the more I'm just like, version should just be a separate field.
yeah. Well, I feel the reason I don't like it is because uh it every time we create more fields for something that is like this, I think it like expressions is a perfect example. If you've ever tried to look at plans and look at expressions, it's impossible to look at expressions because it's much easier to look at a plus, like 2 plus 4. When I look at that, when I look at SQL text, it's 2 plus 4. It's fucking like I can read it in this little teeny thing. But like when you have like expressions and nested expressions, and then there's a plus above, and you're just like, I can't fucking read this thing, right? And it's very, very hard to consume. And so there's it's like my comment about this is not because it's bad engineering. It's completely reasonable engineering. It's more like the mental overhead of looking at a multi-part, like a multiple values that together combine to be a reference. So that's what it's about. It's just, and then we have that problem a lot in the plans. And so if we can avoid that here, I'm inclined to do that. But like the engineering, from the engineering side, it completely makes sense. It's just kind of like the psychic overhead, if you will, of having to be like, oh, we have these two different values that you kind of combine mentally to work with. So I'm not going to die on that hill. Like, it's not that important to me, but that's like, I don't know. Like, I mean, Victor, I mean, you probably looked at the most plans of anybody here. I think, like, as much as like
I'm
the
gonna
function
percolate on
thing,
this offline. I think is what I need
yeah,
to do.
yeah, that's fine. But I was gonna say, like the function thing, as much as it's like kind of weird, like that wasn't the first version of the function pointers, right? We initially had something that was more structured, but it was just too hard to look at the fucking plans. And that was why we came up with that sort of composite of like function name, short name for each of the types, right? It's kind of a weird, hacky thing. But it was trying to say like, well, we need a pointer, we want it to be human readable, and we want it to be compact, and we don't want. And so I kind of think the same about this. So anyway, but I think, yeah, Victor, maybe think about it a little bit. Um, yeah, I actually think that we're in a pretty good place. I think there are a few things here. Like we melted Victor down. I think we talked about things that he didn't care that much about too long. Um, I'm just giving you a hard time, Victor. That's no.
No,
hard
I think
Yeah.
I think the key takeaway from this was like I really like David's point about we should put the namespace in the file itself, and I'm like, cool, but that gives us the mapping rather than being like, oh, this namespace matches this in this file. It's like the file has the namespace in it, your plan has a namespace in it. Okay, those are obviously the same thing. Okay, good. Yeah. And then it's just like, what is a name? By any other name, something as sweet. Okay. I didn't think about.
Yeah, you need to go back and read your Romeo and Juliet a little more.
Yes, exactly. That was good think, everyone.
All right, Ben, it was nice meeting you. Good seeing you, Boshin.
Peace.
Bye, guys.
It's me too.
And stopping the recording.